Like it or not, the Bourne movies left their mark on the action genre, for better or worse, and pioneered the modern high-stakes, high-intrigue subgenre of the spy thriller. They paved the way for future action movies to authentically combine over-the-top fight scenes with realistic, human characters set in grounded, believable worlds. The Bourne mold was so influential that, a decade after the start of the franchise, it copied the very framework that the first movie popularized, with less than favorable results. If you're not aware of the thematic and structural inspiration which everything from Taken to Captain America the Winter Soldier to Bond films took from the Bourne series, then you must at least have heard about the shaky cam. Although I have a deep appreciation for the impact these action espionage classics had on myself and on cinema as a whole, I'd be remiss if I didn't give some lip service to the abhorrent camera work Paul Greengrass inspired. Shaky cam ideally adds both a sense of urgency and freneticism to action scenes. Whether it be a hand-to-hand fight, shootout, or car chase, shaky cam can be extremely effective and not disgusting to look at. The problem is that it's often an excuse for directors to entirely forego stuntmen or choreographers, film whatever garbled mess of a fight scene the actors are capable of with their blue belts in bullshido, and leave the burden of making a coherent scene to the editors, whose only practical method of making the nonsense they've been given look presentable is to hide the mistakes with rapid cutting, effectively preventing your brain from accurately interpreting what it's seeing. Despite showing the world how little effort can be put into action choreography while getting very favorable results, the Bourne spirit lives on in admirable ways as well. The Bourne identity perfectly encapsulated the sense of lurking danger the protagonist in any spy thriller should feel. By putting the main character at odds with international governments in a world eerily similar to our own, it gave the viewer the impression that such nefarious, conniving global authorities could be conducting equally shady business right under our noses. And Matt Damon's forceful performance as a highly skilled agent desperately trying to piece together his identity makes for a compelling protagonist anyone can get behind. The atmosphere was tense and uncertain, the characters were sympathetic and earnest, and the world they inhabited felt real. Probably because it's based on reality one-to-one. Admit it, you know the CIA aren't telling us everything. I have the documents to prove. The Bourne supremacy and ultimatum followed suit, stripping Jason of his happy ending and throwing him back in the deep end for our sadistic entertainment with less gripping story arcs and a hell of a lot more shaky cam. Ultimatum capped off the trilogy nicely, but its cathartic conclusion was upended by 2016's Jason Bourne, which stands as little more than a collection of retcons and contrivances used to sap as much blood from the stone that is this franchise as possible. And, obligatory reminder, we don't talk about legacy. It was a valiant effort, just pitifully executed. The Bourne trilogy, as it stands, is a time capsule of iconic, influential action classics. The spin-offs stand as inferior copies, and sadly, all of the sequels do more harm than good to the Bourne reputation. They struck gold the first time around, but overall, I'd argue that the Bourne series is comprised of formulaic, unremarkable, popcorn-munching action thrillers. It's good, but what if it was better? What if you could have the best aspects of the Bourne mold without the imperfections? What if there was a film that embodied the key components of the spy thriller, had immaculate action choreography, a world that was both realistic and layered, genuine relatable characters, and added a gripping political subplot on top of all that? Well, then, you would have The Foreigner.
Again, my sincere condolences. But there's nothing I can do.
You will change your mind.
If you have not seen this film, then here's your warning. I will be covering spoilers, not all of them, but significant ones nevertheless. The Foreigner is an experience best appreciated fresh, with no knowledge of the plot whatsoever. All you need to know is that it's good, and if you take my word for it, better than any of the Bourne films. You can always come back here after having seen it, but if you insist on staying anyway...
Come on, Shirley. Up you get. Shirley.
In 2017, Martin Campbell's The Foreigner released, amounting to critical and commercial adequacy. It was by no means a flop, but if I can convince you of anything with this video, it'll be that The Foreigner is criminally underrated. The story sees an elderly Vietnamese man, Quan Ngoc Min, who everybody calls Quan, seek revenge for the death of his daughter owed to a terrorist bombing in London. But the terrorists aren't who you think they'd be. I don't know who you'd think they are or what you think they'd believe in or look like, but they're just unassuming British millennials. They form a renegade offshoot of the Irish Republican Army calling themselves the authentic IRA and are committing atrocities in order to stop, in their words, the illegal British occupation of Northern Ireland. Kwan couldn't care less and just wants justice for his daughter, his last living relative, taken from him under all too familiar circumstances. The only drive he has left is justice, and since the authorities are ineffective as ever, he takes matters into his own hands, severing ties to his loved ones and fully committing to the unhinged measures he's about to take. He starts his search for answers with a London minister named Liam Hennessy. As an ex-IRA member himself, Hennessy's been making the rounds on the news, vocally denouncing the authentic IRA and essentially covering his own ass. But Kwan's not buying it. He is, in fact, so certain that Hennessy knows who the bombers are that he MacGyvers his own bomb in the office's bathrooms to intimidate the stubborn minister. Kwan stalks him to his home in the countryside, sets off more bombs, and continues demanding the names of the bombers. And if at any point you feel sorry for Hennessy, just remember that he wasn't as reformed or innocent as he'd like you to believe.
Jesus Christ, I said hit a few financial targets. That's it. No one gets hurt. That's what we agreed to.
He is sincere here, at least partly. He greenlit bombings, yes, in order to push the cabinet minister to pardon a list of 40 Irishmen who were not so nice to the Brits back in the day, but he didn't want any civilians to get hurt. He makes it clear through his dialogue and actions that he has good intentions, but by facilitating the authentic IRA's access to Semtex explosives and by not taking direct oversight in their affairs, he opened a Pandora's box for which he must pay the price. He may not have directly organized any of the bombings, and he may not have wanted a reckless resurgence of the IRA with no supervision, but his negligence got people killed. The Foreigner is as much a revenge story for Kwan as it is a tragedy for Hennessy. This man spends the movie trying to make amends for his carelessness, and look what he gets for it. Made into the Parliament's bitch for lying to them, outed as a cheater for crossing Kwan, and constantly berated by those closest to him for having de-radicalized over the years. By the end of the film, sympathy for Hennessy is both sensible and justified.
Sitting in your fancy houses cozying up to the Brits. You're not the Liam I once knew.
The first time I watched The Foreigner, I was totally invested in Kwan getting his revenge, as I thought all the movie would offer is a typical action thriller plot. The second time I watched it, I found myself far more interested in the political side of the story, with all the twists and turns that take place while Kwan is off screen. And on my third watch, I was surprised to see myself more interested in Hennessy's character than anything else, not in the least owed to Pierce Brosnan's phenomenal performance. I think Hennessy even has more screen time than Kwan, which you'd be forgiven for not expecting after the way The Foreigner was marketed. The trailers give the impression that this is a fast-paced, explosive thrill ride, which I can understand. Intriguing characters and nuanced storytelling aren't exactly in vogue nowadays. But that's just not representative of the actual film. The posters, too, clad in orange and teal like every other action-oriented movie before it. Well, the English posters. I don't know what they were thinking with the foreign ones. Like, are they even looking at each other there? Is that even Hennessy's hand aiming that gun? Like, This movie was mismarketed, full stop. Yes, if audiences went into cinemas expecting action, they would have gotten it, fair enough. But none of the posters or trailers encapsulate the heartfelt character work or emphasis on political subterfuge, which are both far more important to the essence of The Foreigner than its fight scenes are. Okay, Lumo, that's great and all, but how is The Foreigner anything like Bourne? Firstly, I resent the idea that simply because Kwan is not a spy with amnesia, The Foreigner can't be similar to Bourne. And secondly, the similarities between the films are admittedly so few that they're almost negligible. As soon as we get into character motivations and specific narrative events, we see that they are overwhelmingly different. The reason I draw the comparison at all is because of the prevalence of stylistic similarities. Of course, if you're willing to get broad enough, then X-Men and Frozen are basically the same movie. Don't take my word for it, there's an entire channel dedicated to making such bizarre comparisons. In The Foreigner's case, I'd argue that it is similar to Bourne's style in all the ways that make those spy classics so iconic. Jason Bourne is a super spy seeking the truth about his forgotten past while on the run from global authorities. Kwan is a bereft ex-special forces, explosives, and sabotage expert who terrorizes corrupt politicians in order to find his daughter's killers. Not two alike, are they? No, on the surface, dramatically distinct. But the manner in which their respective films portray their journeys is where the parallels become apparent. The atmosphere is cold and calculated, not exactly hopeless, but cynical to the degree that there are no heroes in the world, only self-interested parties with varying moral standards. Our main character won't be saving any kittens out of treetops, but we know he's got nothing malevolent planned. The politicians and law enforcement, on the other hand, are cutthroat and ideologically or power-driven. They see the protagonist as a nuisance, an obstacle in the way of their agenda, and every effort to neutralize that threat to their supremacy is further evidence of their desperation to keep their corruption under wraps. And above all else, the films frame the protagonist as the underdog, a man whose only agency is a combination of decisive wit and years of experience. Armed with improvised weaponry and a cunning intellect, and with the aid of whoever is willing to help him along the way, the protagonist is single-minded in his goals and essentially has nothing left to lose. If you mix and match these thematic factors, you could end up with the outlines of any movie. Point being, The Foreigner bears a striking resemblance to the Bourne series when you look beneath the surface. And with that clarified, it's time for me to step on some toes. Not only is The Foreigner the best Bourne-style movie out there, it's better than the Bourne identity. And not only is The Foreigner better than any of the Bourne movies, they weren't all that great to begin with. Jason's story was over after Identity finished. It was a tight, compelling, high-intrigue action thriller that didn't need to get dragged out for the next 14 years. The Bourne supremacy lazily re-established the status quo by killing off Jason's love interest, effectively thrusting him into the same position he was in at the beginning of Identity, only this time he's motivated by revenge and just wants to be left alone. How inventive. The sequels make the films blend together, as Jason's motivations and actions don't change enough over the course of the series. He's looking for answers and catharsis but never finds them. He goes around the globe tracking people, making phone calls, and rescuing the women unlucky enough to take pity on him. Every time he shuts one door, another one opens. In Ultimatum, he finally learns the secrets of the Treadstone program and his place in it. And then Jason Bourne materializes a new sinister Black Ops surveillance program and a plot thread about his suddenly relevant father being killed by a suddenly relevant assassin. The Bourne Identity is an excellent classic, and I in no way mean to diminish its quality or muddy its reputation. The sequels did a good enough job of that already. But I don't know how else to put it. The Foreigner is just better. And considering how it outmatches the Bourne series in almost every regard, it's a shame that we let that franchise hold such prestige for so long. While Bourne was trudging along for the past decade and a half, a better version of it was always possible. Not only are Quan's motivations more clear to the audience, they are so simple that he achieves catharsis after just one movie, and with the added benefit of no amnesia to leave possible new motivations to be introduced in unnecessary sequels. Also, The Foreigner's world of British politics and terrorism is far more developed and captivating than Bourne's world of covert genetic experiments and espionage. The Bourne films see antagonists come and go, with the exception of Nikki, who serves as little more than Jason's plot armor. For the most part, though, the suits who stare at screens and bark orders at their well-equipped subordinates lack dimension and charm. Hennessy, however, steals the show and delivers a performance arguably more memorable than the titular character. And the supporting cast members each have their own fleshed-out characters, with agency and goals that go beyond "it'll be a PR nightmare if this gets out." And then there's the action. Clear, simple, and grounded. The fight choreography gives off the distinct impression that Quan is an old man, struggling to keep up with the competition. But Jackie Chan can't help but bring his signature high-energy stunt work to the table. Any single fight scene from The Foreigner blows Bourne's right out of the water. Most of them are jumbled messes of barely decipherable punches, but in all fairness, it's difficult to fault Identity's ambush fight for anything. Yes, that was a great inspiration for the lazily shot and edited fight scenes to follow, but it stands as one of the best versions of a shaky cam fight in all of cinema, making the directorial switch from Lyman to Greengrass all the more contentious. Since the advent of the quote-unquote action movie renaissance, it's become clear just how sorely we've missed clarity. And if that were the only criteria in deciding which movie is better, then The Foreigner would win. Unfairly so, because we also need to take into account the set construction and scale of the action, and with that in mind, The Foreigner takes the cake. Look, the Bourne movies will always hold a special place in action cinema history, and nothing new can change how well crafted the Bourne Identity is. If anything, we should revel in the fact that decades after its release, filmmakers continue to draw inspiration from and pay respect to it. And I don't even think that was an explicit goal of the people behind The Foreigner, but whether they intended to make a Bourne-style film or not, they surpassed the standard, making a woefully underappreciated gem and raising the bar for all action thrillers to follow. The Foreigner proved that high-stakes political thrillers can have the dramatic depth of an entire season of television without succumbing to the pitfalls of otherwise genre-defining monotonous tropes and cliches. If you think you've been spoiled by watching this, then rest assured there's a lot more to The Foreigner than what I've discussed here. So if you were a bad viewer who watched this video before seeing it, then it's still not too late. Go show this flick some love, and as always, I love discussion and debate. So if you have any criticism of my takes on The Foreigner or Bourne franchise, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.